You think you've changed. You've read the books. You've ended the relationship, quit the job, moved to a different city. And yet, somehow, you're standing in the same place again. Different names, different faces, but the same emotional wreckage. The same feeling. The same result. This isn't bad luck. This isn't coincidence. This is your unconscious running a program it wrote long before you were conscious enough to question it. Carl Jung called this the shadow. Not a metaphor for your worst impulses, but a living psychological structure. It is the repository of everything you were forced to disown, every part of yourself that was told, directly or indirectly, that it was too much, too weak, too angry, too needy. Those parts didn't disappear. They went underground, and underground they began to architect your life without your permission. Here is where most people fail to understand the mechanics of this. They believe the shadow is simply negative emotions they need to release. So they journal. They meditate. They cry in a therapy session and feel temporary relief. What they don't realize is that the shadow isn't just a feeling. It's a pattern-generating system. It doesn't just make you feel bad. It makes you choose. It makes you perceive. It shapes what you notice, what you're attracted to, and most dangerously, what you cannot see at all. Jung described this through the concept of projection. When there is something inside you that you refuse to acknowledge, a hunger for power, a deep reservoir of rage, a terror of abandonment, you don't experience it as part of yourself. You experience it as something happening to you from the outside, the controlling partner, the passive-aggressive colleague, the parent who never respected you. You're not imagining these people, but the intensity of your reaction. The way certain situations light you up with a disproportionate emotional charge, that charge is yours. The external world becomes a cinema screen for your interior life. This is the first psychological realization you need to sit with. The patterns in your external life are not happening to you. They are being projected by you. The unconscious doesn't construct these loops out of cruelty. It constructs them out of precision. It is trying to resolve something unfinished. Jung called this the compulsion to repeat. What remains unintegrated in the psyche will continue to surface in external form until you meet it consciously. Think about the archetype at work here. Every human psyche contains structural patterns. The hero, the victim, the orphan, the rebel, the caretaker. These are not personality types. They are autonomous complexes that can take over the ego at any moment. When your victim archetype is in the driver's seat, you don't just feel victimized. You unconsciously organize situations to confirm that reality. You read neutrality as rejection. You interpret love as impending betrayal. You think you're being realistic. You are actually being faithful to a map that was drawn in childhood and has never been updated. And this is the uncomfortable truth, the identity you have built. The story you tell about who you are and why your life looks the way it does is often a sophisticated rationalization for an unconscious pattern. Your ego is not the author of your life. It is the narrator. It explains what the deeper system has already decided. Most people spend their lives solving the wrong problem. They work on the symptoms, the anxiety, the failed relationships, the career stagnation, without ever going to the source. The source is not what happened to you. The source is what you concluded about yourself because of what happened to you, and how you buried that conclusion so deeply that you now confuse it for reality. Let's go deeper, because understanding that you have a shadow is not the same as integrating it. Most people who encounter Jungian psychology get just far enough to feel intellectually enlightened and then stop. They learn the vocabulary. They start identifying their projections in conversation. They feel like they're doing the work. But awareness without dissent is just sophisticated avoidance. You can name your pattern and still be completely enslaved by it. Here is the second realization. The shadow grows stronger the more you spiritualize your avoidance. In 2026, this has become an epidemic. The wellness industry has produced an entire generation of people who have learned to perform self-awareness while keeping their deepest wounds completely untouched. You meditate to feel calm, but calm is not the same as integrated. You practice gratitude to shift your mindset, But positivity used as a shield is just repression wearing a better outfit. You think you're growing, but you're actually feeding your shadow by keeping it well managed and out of sight. The mechanism here is what Jung called the persona, the mask you construct to face the world. The persona itself is not the problem. The problem is when the gap between your persona and your shadow becomes so vast that your entire psychological energy is consumed maintaining the distance between them. The more rigid and polished your public self, the more volatile and ungoverned your shadow becomes. The person who insists they never get angry has a shadow filled with rage. The person who presents as completely self-sufficient is usually terrified of needing anyone. The unconscious doesn't need you to stay broken. It just needs you to stay unaware. Now consider what this looks like in actual lived experience. Not in theory, but in the texture of your daily life right now. You scroll past the person whose success triggers an emotion you refuse to name. You end a relationship citing incompatibility, when the real issue is that this person saw something in you that you couldn't bear to look at yourself. You chase a career milestone and feel empty upon reaching it because the hunger wasn't actually for achievement. It was a displaced need for worth that no external result can ever permanently satisfy. You avoid conflict to the point where every relationship in your life is built on a foundation of things you've never said. These are not character flaws. These are the fingerprints of an unintegrated shadow operating across every domain of your life simultaneously. The third and most critical realization is this: your repeating patterns are not evidence of weakness. They are evidence of loyalty. You were loyal to an identity that was formed under conditions of psychological survival. As a child, you could not afford to feel the full weight of your abandonment, your powerlessness, your shame. So your psyche made an intelligent, adaptive decision. It split those experiences off and stored them. The problem is that the psyche does not understand that you are no longer a child. It does not know that the threat has passed. It is still running the same protective program in a life that no longer requires that protection. And because that program is unconscious, you experience it not as a choice, but as reality itself. This is the mind shift that changes everything. Your patterns are not who you are. They are who you had to become. And there is a profound difference between those two things. So what does real integration look like? Not as a concept, but as a practice you can actually begin. It starts with radical noticing. Not journaling about your feelings, but catching the moments when your reaction is disproportionate to the situation. That spike of shame when someone mildly criticizes you. That sudden rage when someone cancels plans. That compulsive need to check whether someone is still interested in you. These are not random emotional events. They're entry points into the shadow. Each disproportionate reaction is the unconscious tapping on the door. The next step is the one most people refuse to take. You must stop immediately explaining your reaction and instead sit inside it long enough to ask, what does this feeling remind me of? Not intellectually, viscerally, because the shadow communicates in sensation, not in logic. When you can trace the current emotional charge back to its original context, the specific wound, the specific conclusion, the specific moment of psychological survival, you have made the unconscious conscious. And in that moment, the pattern loses its automaticity. It does not disappear. But for the first time, you are in relationship with it rather than controlled by it. Integration is not resolution. You do not eliminate the shadow. You develop a conscious relationship with it, which means acknowledging the rage without unleashing it, feeling the grief without being consumed by it, recognizing the need without being enslaved by it. Jung was clear on this. The goal is not a shadow-free life. The goal is wholeness. And wholeness includes everything you have spent your life trying not to be. Your life will keep repeating until you stop trying to escape your patterns and start entering them with enough consciousness to understand what they are protecting. The loop is not your enemy. It is your most honest teacher. The question is whether you are finally willing to learn.